last year, Eagles! You've purposely taken the game, preventing my Giants a playoff spot! Refresh my memory. Exactly how many wins did your Giants have this season?
And of course, the answer is 6, because the Giants just didn't get it done. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes here on Park Ridge Sports History. Hi, everyone. This is Will O'Toole welcoming you to a new year and a new edition of the Park History Sports. I'd like to send a shout out to Howard Fredericks again. He always gives me some great ideas. And this week, in addition to talking about the Giants and their elimination from the playoffs before they even got there, Howard had passed me along the great trade the Mets made this week, getting the Cleveland shortstop Lindor from the Indians. And I'm going to do a little bit of history on Met deals and highlight some of the best ones that they've made, some of the worst ones. And there is one surprise of the guy who is actually traded for himself here on Park Ridge Sports. So without further ado, I just want to get into a basic thing. Look, each week, as I say all the time, it's like we're sitting in a bar having a beer and a hamburger, and we're talking everything sports. So if anything comes out of my mind, which is very open some days, and it's almost like a parking lot for rent up there, but it's all because I want this to be almost, it's somewhat organized. I do plan on talking about some things, but as I talk, I think about other things. So I hope you can just stay on board and kind of stay with my narrative. Anyway, the Giants have nobody to blame but themselves. And this week, it kind of bothered me that Joe Judge was so critical of what the Eagles did. And that was play a reserve player, a sub, in a game that meant nothing to the Eagles. And in fact, it was, hey, Doug Peterson could always argue, I want to see what this guy does against a potential playoff team so that in the future, I might just keep him around for next year. That being said, I know that you can take what the Philadelphia Eagles did, and for fans who didn't happen to see the game or are coming in late on this, I know it's over a week ago, and of course, the Washington football team, used to be the Redskins, they did qualify for the playoffs by beating Philadelphia in Philadelphia on Sunday night, and that eliminated the Giants. And of course, anyone who's following Park Ridge Sports during the season knew I was very interested, particularly in the NFC East, because as I stated about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I wanted the winner to have no more than 4 or 5 wins, and then I would definitely root for them come to get into the Super Bowl. Alas, that didn't happen. Washington actually finished 7-9. Other playoff teams have qualified with a 7-9 record. I think the most recent was the Seattle Seahawks, and they actually did win a first-round game, being 7-9. Alas, those ideas, those fortunes have gone out the window for me. But really, what bothered me the most is Judge, his first year at the Giants' helm. Obviously, he's got talent. He has pedigree, coming, of course, from the Patriots with all those Super Bowl appearances. But one thing that kind of bothered me, and I don't know whether the media really picked up on this, is that ultimately you can't blame the Eagles for you not getting into the playoffs. And you can be highly critical about what another coach does, but you really shouldn't be. That's up to the coach. And really, I understand. I've seen some former players probably criticize Peterson for his decision that maybe they should have gone out and tried to win the game with their starting quarterback, and that you owe it to the players. I get all that. And that's something that Peterson has to deal with in his own locker room. But for me, being an outsider as the Giant coach, kind of ripping the strategy of Peterson, hey, listen, the blame for the Giants not making the playoffs goes on the Giants. And I did a little statistical study, and I know, in the NFL, if you take a look at the difference between winning and losing, at the difference between making the playoffs and being an also-ran, is usually, if you cut that down to a number, if you just average the points, I would say that about 85% of the time, games are lost by fewer than a touchdown. And it kind of holds here as well because of the Giants' 10 losses. They lost 5 games by 8 points or fewer. And the reason I put the 8 points in there is that, with the bringing in the 2-point conversion, it's really just one score and an extra point or a conversion away from tying a game. But the Giants lost they lost their first 5 games, and they lost them by a total of 22, 25, 26, 28. So that's 5 points, 6 points, 5.5 points, basically a touchdown. All right. I'm eliminating their first loss of the season because they lost by 10. And of course, let me just pick up the Giants right here. I hope I have it right with me. I don't. Please be patient. But anyway, and I don't need to go over the teams that they lost to, but I will go over the scores. They lost their first game by 10. They lost their second by 4, 8, 3, 1, and 2. All right. They win a game. Then they lose to the Eagles 22-21, a game that they could have also had. Okay. So they lost their first 5 games, then win, then lose. So at one point in the season, they're 5-7. And this is where it really comes down on the team that should be blaming themselves and the coach. They're at 5-7. And I had even said maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was rooting for the Giants, but I didn't want them to win any more games or anybody in the NFC East. And I even went over the schedule with everybody who follows the show. And the Giants went out and I forget what order it is, but they played Arizona, Cleveland, and Baltimore. I think I do have it in that order. So here you are, 5-7. You are playing 2 legit playoff teams, but if you think you're in the a playoff contender, you should be able to beat them. And really, when you think about it, the way that the NFC East was working this year, all you needed, when you think about it, was at least 1 win and maybe 2, as it turned out, of those 3. Well, the Giants went for the hat trick. They came up winless in all 3 contests. And in fact, they were behind the 8 ball before they even knew it. They were down 13-0 to Arizona and lose the game. Then they're down 13-3 to Cleveland and they lose the game. And then they're down in probably one of the worst performances that they had over the last 6-8 weeks. They're down 20-3 to Baltimore at halftime and never even make a show of that game. And of course, they come back and they win against the Cowboys to put them maybe within reach of the playoffs. But of course, as I stated, they had to depend on Philadelphia beating Washington, and it didn't happen. So instead of saying to yourself, hey, look, we had a nice winning streak. We won 5 of 7. We should have gotten it done, but we didn't against 2 future playoff teams. We know where we're going. No, I thought Judge spent too much time criticizing the Eagles and criticizing Peterson. And again, as I stated, Peterson has to deal with his own players in the locker room. Many, I'm sure, were upset that almost like they were, putting up the white flag and they were using somebody else. But here's how things go too. To Peterson, if you want to support Peterson here, suppose he threw his best starter out there and he gets hurt. What does he say to the players? Hey, look, I'm trying to play for next year. I know you guys are going to be around for next year. Maybe that's what's in his mindset. Why should I try to help the Giants when I can see what this other guy off the bench is going to do for me potentially next year and maybe in the future? So there's a lot of argument one way or the other. And what better way to try new or untested talent but to throw them into a game that, yes, quote unquote, might be meaningless for the Eagles. And it is all important for both Washington and New York. But hey, I'm worried about my team. Giants didn't get it done. They lost 3 of their last 4, embarrassed in 3 of their last 4, weren't even a game. Wasn't even in a game in the first half in 3 of those 4. And they never made it a game in any of those. And yet they sit there and complain that I use a backup quarterback instead of my starter in the late stages of the game. You only have yourself to blame. You can't blame the refs. You can't blame other teams. They're not interested in your success. They're only interested in their own. And so I think the Giants, unfortunately, have a lot to think about going forward next year. Now, do they have some potential for next year? Yeah, everybody does. As you can see, if you take a look at the history of the NFL, you'll see that teams that are 7-9, and we've talked about this, can suddenly rebound to 9-7. I mean, when you think about it, the Giants were 6-10. They were within 5 games of winning, within a touchdown. Let's just say the closest ones, the 3, the 1, and the 2-point losses that they got touchdowns in. Now they're 9-7 instead of 6-10. So it has, because the talent is so close in the NFL, that has a way of balancing out. And it's just a shame because I thought the Giants did a pretty commendable job. I know that I never listen. They were hurt in their running game. They've got new young talent. They still have a developing quarterback. They need some wide receiver. They need a lot of work. But if you want to look at it this way, hey, they came within 1 game of making the playoffs this year. In this year, really wasn't that bad of a year. And they have only one way to go, and obviously that is up. Howard and I were sending emails back and forth. And of course, I just want to do a shout out here before I get into my real thing. And that is the Mets Blockbuster trade for Francisco Lindor. And we'll talk about that in a couple of seconds. But this is just a shout out. I didn't do a cartoon on Tommy Lasorda. I got to be honest with you. I love, and I'm framing it the wrong way. I'm saying it the wrong way. I do appreciate doing, let's say, when a great player passes, and to go over his career and do some things. I haven't done one yet on Tommy Lasorda. I plan on doing one. Maybe next week I'll show you it. But I was thinking about Lasorda, and of course, being a big Reds fan, I never really liked Lasorda because he was on the hated Dodgers. He was their manager. But over the years, you started to realize that for all his bluster and for all his Hollywood all of his Hollywood, and he was a charismatic. There's no question that Lasorda was really a charismatic manager. Maybe not in the same realm as, let's say, a Sparky Anderson or a Billy Martin, but in his own right, he did have charisma. Plus, he had Hollywood and Los Angeles and all the rest of it, the whole 9 yards. So I was never a big Dodger fan. And, of course, that extended to Lasorda. But one thing I knew about Lasorda, I thought he was a pretty good manager. And, of course, doing the statistics, it kind of bears me out. I don't think he was as good as Alston, and the statistics bear that out. Just compare, and the only reason I'm comparing Alston with Lasorda is that they followed each other in the line of succession with Dodger managers. You got to recall that one of the most famous things that I remember as a kid is that Walter Alston always signed 1-year deals to be manager. But you basically knew that he was going to be the manager every year. And the thing with Alston, here's the interesting thing. It's you wonder if Alston had become the Dodger manager prior to 1954, whether they could have won a couple of more World Series in New York, or in Brooklyn, rather. As it was, he was a World Series champ. This is mind-boggling. 4 times. People forget that he was the only Brooklyn manager to win a World Series in Brooklyn. But then he takes basically that same group, and in 59 wins the first World Series in California when the Dodgers defeated the Go-Go Sox of 1959. And, of course, on that team, I think he had an up-and-down Sandy Koufax. He had Duke Snider, really in his waning days with the Dodgers. But he turns it around and becomes 63. He's the World Series champ. He does beat the hated Yankees. He sweeps them with Koufax, and we've talked about Koufax winning 2 games in that series. He also wins in 1965, again with Koufax doing it against the Minnesota Twins. And then he comes back in 66 and wins the pennant, and then gets whitewashed by the Baltimore Orioles and Frank Robinson, and the Orioles getting their first World Series in championship in Baltimore. And then he comes back in 74 and wins his final pennant with the Dodgers. And of course, they get beat by the Oakland A's in 5 games. That was the team that, basically they were putting that team together from the 1970s on. And one of the guys that they had relied on, or were going to rely on with the Alston Dodgers, was a guy by the name of Bobby Valentine. And of course, he broke his leg. Terrible, but they had high hopes for Bobby Valentine. Anyway, Lasorda was a member of that coaching staff with Alston. And really what he did was he actually took that core 4 players, and really they were a true core 4 players of Garvey, Russell, and Davey Lopes, and Ron Say, and along with pitcher Don Sutton. They win 74, okay, with under Walter Alston. But then Tommy Lasorda wins 3 pennants with that group in 77, 78, and 81. And then he finally breaks through and wins the World Series, beating, again, the Yankees. But for all of his blather and stuff, and I don't mean it that way, but Lasorda was a pretty good manager. I was kind of surprised that his winning percentage was only .526. And I guess really what happened was he had those great early teams. He had some bad years. And in fact, I have it right down here. Here are the stats, where Alston was a 4-time World Series winner. He also won 3 additional pennants in his years of managing. Walter Alston had 10 seasons where he won 90 or more games, and 2 seasons where he won 100. And he was only 3 times under 500. Walter Alston, 3 times. Not bad. And that was the years, I believe it was the flux years between really Drysdale and Koufax, and with the emergence of the Garvey group. So let's say 67, 68, they were under 500. Still competitive. It wasn't like they were terrible. Really close on 500, but not good enough. Anyway, Lasorda, and this amazed me too, with the research. 7 times he won 90 games, but he never won 100. And he was a 2-time World Series champ, and he won 3 additional pennants. Of course, that 88 series, he won that with the one swing of the bat by Kirk Gibson. That was an incredible run. That was Orel Hershiser really forfeiting his Hall of Fame career for that one season. And I think, sometimes he's another guy I think we should think about. He definitely sacrificed his Hall of Fame career, and he was on target for a Hall of Fame career for that 1 year. I mean, really, Lasorda really abused him that year, and Orel Hershiser just always came out firing BBs. He was just amazing that year. He had 1 season, Tommy Lasorda, of being 500, but he was under 500 6 times in his career. That just astonished me. I didn't think it was that many. But Lasorda was a great manager. He was a great ambassador for baseball. I always thought that had they not eliminated NL president and AL president, he would have made a fantastic president for the NL. He was a big anti-DH guy like me. I think he loved the game as it was. He was a true salesman for the game. I'm actually surprised that Lasorda never went into, let's say, color commentary or anything like that. He was just, as you start to realize, he just loved baseball, and he was always a joy to be around. Yeah, I know he had his fights with the umpires, and you don't want to be there, but I just think he was a great diplomat for the game, and just a real shout out. And actually, Lasorda did something that Walter Alston and not too many other great managers have done, and that is manage only one team. Pretty remarkable. 21 years with the same team. That's phenomenal, especially with managers. Basically a good manager it seems like they have maybe a 5-6 year run with a team, maybe 7, and then they move on. All right. Even Whitey Herzog, great manager, contemporary. He managed 2 different ball clubs there, Kansas City and St. Louis. I know he was at Texas as well. Billy Martin, I mean, that his managerial career was a carousel. Sparky Anderson, 2 different squads. And we know how great a Hall of Fame manager Anderson was. So even Bobby Cox was the manager of Toronto before he became the longtime manager of the Atlanta Braves. So it's kind of unique what both Alston and Lasorda have done. And, just a real shout out to Lasorda. He is a Hall of Famer. As I said, I didn't realize this too. He was a 2-time manager of the year, but he was just a positive effect on baseball, and he will be missed. All right, let's get to the Met deal. And here's the crazy thing about this. I'm going to go over this with everybody. I was looking at, and here's the proof. I spent time before I wanted to think about famous deals that Cleveland and the Mets had. And do you realize that this deal with the Cleveland Indians, and I went through all the way back to their fledgling days as the Amazings, the New York Mets, as the 62 Amazing Mets under Casey Stengel, etc. They've actually made 13 deals, trades with the Indians. They've had another kind of things where they've either signed a guy off a waiver wire that used to be, or they purchased a contract that from the Cleveland Indians and vice versa. But in fact, really, these are some of the deals that the Mets have made. And I do want to get into one of the greatest deals, if not the greatest deal in baseball history, and end the program with just talking everything about him, because I think he's great, and give a shout out to a book I grew up with. But do you realize they've made 13 deals with the Indians in their career? But this one, I think without a doubt, and you guys be the judge of this. Oh, there's that word again. Here are the early deals with them. They've traded Brent Strom for Phil Hennigan. That was actually their second deal. I'm going to save the very first deal they ever made. They traded Ed Glynn for Dominic Bullinger. I don't even think he ever played in the major leagues. They traded Ray Siraj for Tommy Verizor. Now, Verizor was a shortstop infielder. I recall him playing more with Detroit than with Cleveland. Then they traded Ricky Nelson. No, not the singer of fame, for Don Schultz, and not Sergeant Schultz of Hogan's Heroes. Then probably one that everyone kind of recalls, they got Jeremy Burnitz for Dave Malicki and Paul Bird. That was deal number 7 between the two franchises. And of course, here's one that everyone will remember, I'm sure. The Mets acquired Ryan Thompson for Mark Clark, not the general from World War II, but Mark Clark, the pitcher, who I thought was a pretty serviceable pitcher. Basically like 12-10, 11-9 in his best years. But he was kind of a horse on the mound. He would always give you, it would seem to me, like 150, 170 innings of the year. So he wasn't going to win a Cy Young. You weren't going to win a World Series with a whole staff of Mark Clarks, but as we like to say in now baseball parlance, he was a serviceable player for you. He did he gave you some help when you needed it. Here's the one that I know everyone says, so you guys be the determinant of this. Alex Escobar on 12/11/01 was traded for Roberto Alomar. And then, of course, you have Jay Bruce for Ryder Ryan. I do not recall his name. And then Kevin Palinke for Lockhart and Haggerty. And, of course, Kevin Palinke was a catcher that I thought the Mets thought they might have caught kind of like lightning in the bottle. He had a couple of months there when he was playing full-time where he played pretty good. I think he went to Purdue. So, all the qualification was kind of a smart guy. But he never really materialized with them. And then this one, Rosario and Jimenez for Lindor. Now, look, this, I know that when Howard sent me the email, he said, hey, take a look at the deal that the Mets got. And I was, wow, they got Lindor. And then I was when I saw the players that they gave up, I know that the Mets were really high on Jimenez. I was not a big fan of Rosario. I thought I thought maybe he should have changed his approach at bat and try to go for, let's say, a more slashing style. He had too much of a home run angle, and he struck out a ton of times and didn't walk as much as I thought would be helpful for him. So that might change with a new environment in Cleveland, where they'll definitely be able to insert him and use him every day. Carrasco, though, is the guy who I really, really like. And the reason I say that is let me just see it first. Oh, here it is. Okay. He was 3-4 last year. This guy won 18 games back in 2017. I know he's 33, but hey, the Mets have gotten quite a bit of use out of older guys. All right. And he's going to really be inserted in that pitching staff. Look, if the Mets can compete for the next 3 years, he'll only be 36. He's worth, to me, I am sure that Cleveland saw it maybe, hey, let's get rid of him a year too soon rather than a year too late. Maybe they had that Branch Rickey mindset in there. I know that the Mets were after Lindor. Thing is, can they sign him and keep him? But I really like the fact that they got Carrasco. Now, he's been under 500 for the last 2 years. I'm going to throw out last year, as a matter of fact, 2020. But I will tell you this. His ERA last year was 2.91. Now, my concern would have been this. He went from 14-12 in 2015, 11-8. He was 18-6 and led the league in wins with a 3.29 ERA. He was 17-10 the following year, 3.38 ERA, and had a down year in 2019. His ERA was inflated to 5.29. But this is why I have high hopes for him. And that is that his ERA, basically, I know only 7 decisions and only 12 games instead of 23 from the previous year. But his ERA was basically halved. It's down to 2.91. So I'm looking at that. He pitched almost as many innings as the year before. He had 68 innings this year as opposed to 80 the year before. But he's right. And when I'm looking at him, guys, he's never really been burdened with carrying a lot of innings. The most innings was the year he had 18 wins. He only threw 200 innings that year. So you're talking about a guy who had, from age 27 to age 31, the most innings he pitched was 200. The fewest was 134. So you're talking about a guy, 134, 183, 146, 200, 192. Probably about 162 innings if you average all of that out. There's still, to me, some fire in his arm that he could potentially still be throwing bullets this year, next year, and the year beyond that. And as I always talk with a buddy of mine, look, if I can make a deal and win a World Series and maybe, I don't know, fade from the pack over the next 5-6 years, and the guys who I acquired, maybe have bad years after that, was it worth making the deal? And I think for many fans, I think winning it once, and then I could be wrong, but I think if you win it once and you go in full and it turns out that you can win, and maybe you have a few years after that where you're coming up short or you just have to rebuild or regroup, I think most fans would take that. I think I always felt it was more frustrating to always be the bridesmaid, because after a while, I feel for those Dodger teams of the 50s, because after a while you say to yourself, what else can we do to get over the top? And obviously they finally do. And then once they get over the top, they basically dominate or help dominate the NL East when they move out to LA. But my whole point is, if those two guys give you a championship this year, and nothing ever materializes, and maybe those two other guys that you give to Cleveland, especially Jimenez, go on to be Hall of Famers, or one does, or goes on to be a 10-time All-Star and stuff. Was the deal worth it? And I would actually say, yes, it is. And the reason I say that is because going over Met trades, and I'm only highlighting a few of them, but here is a deal. And I'm just going through it. By the way, ready for this? The Mets have made over 425 deals in their franchise history. Actually, I think it's about 435, maybe 438. All right. I didn't use an accounting thing. I was just doing it quickly, a summation on this. But I will tell you this: the top 5 teams that the Mets have made the most deals with, this is going to blow your mind. At least it did me. Number 1. Well, I'm going to save number 1. Cincinnati, they've made 19 separate deals with the Reds. And, of course, the 2 biggest ones, they traded Tom Seaver to the Reds. They do eventually get Tom Seaver back from the Reds. And then they also traded for George Foster. And I would say of all the deals that the Reds and the Mets have made, those were the 2 most significant for the Mets, because one does help the Mets win the World Series in '86. And even though the Reds didn't win a World Series with Tom Seaver on their staff, they do win a division. And, of course, Tom Seaver does go and throw a no-hitter with the Reds. With the Dodgers, I was looking. I have to be very honest with you. When I was going through the Dodger list of deals with the Mets, none of them really come to mind as being blockbusters. It seemed to me, well, I wouldn't say that. They do get Sid Fernandez. And they actually traded, they do get Sid Fernandez. That was actually deal number 10 in their history, because I have it down there. And they do early in their history trade an all-star for an all-star. Although they traded Ron Hunt, who made the all-star team with the Mets, a starter. And I believe he was their first starter in an all-star game, 1964 at Shea Stadium. But they trade Ron Hunt for one of my personal favorite players of all time, a guy that, if had stayed healthy, probably would be in the Hall of Fame today, and that's Tommy Davis. And I've waxed poetica about Tommy Davis. He would be, and he was, a very good pinch designated hitter after he'd broken his ankle and really couldn't play the field anymore. He was a very good player. People don't realize he led the league in RBIs with, I think, 162 for the Dodgers way back when. But that was probably those 2 deals for me with the Dodgers and the Mets are probably the 2 most significant that really jumped out at me. Ron Hunt for Tommy Davis. Not that they won anything with either one of them, but 2 all-stars. And then acquiring Sid Fernandez. And nobody's going to forget the fact that Sid was big in the '86 World Series. Of course, St. Louis, I'm going to do Montreal. And Montreal has been a significant player for the Mets. And I'm going to go so far as to say that Montreal was responsible for 2 Met World Series championships. And, of course, everyone knows the Gary Carter deal in '86. They did have to give up Eubie Brooks, who does come back. I forgot this. He does come back and play for the Mets, and then he gets traded again by the Mets. How about that? I always liked Eubie because he was one of those guys, never complained, was willing to play anywhere, anytime, in any place. And he did go to Montreal, had some very good years with the Expos. But the Expos traded Gary Carter basically for him. And, of course, we all know Carter hits the home run in his first game with the Mets back in '85. Of course, they don't win the World Series or even get to the pennant that year. Actually, I was at that game. It was a cold, cold April day. I remember just freezing. And you got to remember, I worked in the post office. I was used to working out in the environment. And I was freezing. We were out I was there with my brother and a good friend of my brother's, we were out there freezing. And here's the deal. We got so cold that we actually left in the 7th inning. I think there was another reason too. We had to get home. I think our friend had to pick up his wife or something like that. Anyway, we left. We went back to his apartment and watched Carter hit the home run that won the game in extra innings. And here's the thing. He hit it basically in the area we were sitting in left field. But we were happy that he won. We were happy we got to the game. It was a tough expedition to Shea Stadium at the time, too. But we were at the first game that Carter was at. It was just a brutal 50 degrees, but it felt like it was 30. Gray day, typical early spring afternoon baseball clash. But the Mets prevailed, but they didn't win the pennant. So they make a deal with St. Louis. With Montreal. And here's the other deal. Actually, I shouldn't say this. I'm going to throw another one in there. The Mets actually were, because of Montreal deals, actually won not one, not two, but 3 pennants and 2 World Series, because I forgot the 1972 deal. And that was when the Mets got Rusty Staub from the Expos. They do trade Kenny Singleton, one of my favorite all-time players. I still think he should have been the 79 MVP and not Don Baylor. But Singleton would have been a metric GM's dream today because of the walks that he drew. I don't think he ever led, per se, the league in walks, but he had a ton of walks in his career. And his on-base percentage, I think he hit like 282 lifetime, but his on-base percentage makes him like 350, 360, courtesy of all the walks that he drew. He was a really good player. I know that his first year up in Jarry Park, I thought he was going to hit like 20, 25 home runs. He only hit like 5 home runs in either his first or second year up there. They do trade him for Dave McNally. And then he really has his career in Baltimore. But he was part of that Rusty Staub deal in 72. And, of course, what does Rusty Staub do? He helps lead the Mets to the 73 World Series. They do fall to Oakland in 7, but really that was a magical year. And then the other Montreal deal was back in, I think, April. I'm even going to say it was the early months. Maybe it was even before the June 15th trade deadline back in 69, but the Mets acquired Don Clendenin from the Expos. And of course, Clendenin is inserted at first base. I think he hit, I know he hit 22 home runs in 1970 with the Mets playing full time. Well, playing full time with the Mets. I think that year with the Mets, though, I think he might have totaled 18 to 20. The real Met aficionados will know that. But his big moment is that he hits 3 home runs in the 69 World Series and is named MVP. Got the Dodge car. I remember seeing that. Dodge car, the official car for the World Series MVP, if you guys ever remember. I think it was a Dodge Charger, too. But those with Montreal, significant deals. And, of course, ready for this, Kansas City. The Royals. What is it about New York and Kansas City? Because as a kid, I remember that the Yankees supposedly used the Kansas City Athletics as their farm system and acquired, Roger Maris, Bob Cerv, all these guys who would go either on the bench for the Yankees and make them stronger or insert them in the outfield. And, of course, Roger Maris would win 2 MVPs and, of course, hit the 61 homers in 61. But Kansas City seems to be a pipeline to the New York franchises because the Mets, and of course that was, I would say, well, I guess you'd have to consider Seaver too, but Seaver was a different thing. I'm going to say that probably the worst deal the Mets ever made was probably trading Amos Otis for Joe Foy, and that was 69. That's a big if. Maybe had they traded Tommy Agee and not Amos Otis, they might have had a real run in the NL East in 70, 71, and 72. So they traded Otis for Joe Foy. But that was probably and they do get Cone from Kansas City and trade him back to Kansas City. I would say those are the 2 most significant deals with Kansas City. The next team in line with 22 trades. Now, this is unofficial. I'm pretty sure I have it. But if I'm one or two trades, you know what? Then you guys deal with it. But I think you know where I'm coming. These are the top 5 teams that the Mets have dealt with in their career. The Cardinals, of course, probably the most significant. It helped the Mets win the '86 World Series, and that was when they traded away Neil Allen and they got Keith Hernandez. Of course, there's some background to that. There's history involved there. But basically, Herzog got rid of what he thought was a real problem on his team. He comes to the Mets, and of course, Hernandez plays the real hero. In fact, his first 3 letters, hero, H-E-R, Hernandez. That was probably the most significant deal they made with them. And then number 1, as I stated, the LA Dodgers are the number 1 team that the Mets have made deals with, 25 as of this counting. And as I stated, really nothing of significance that I saw with the Dodgers and, of course, LA. And actually, ready for this? The team right now with the fewest deals with the Mets, here's pretty wild. And I was surprised about this because as I was writing this, I said, oh, they only have 4 deals. And then I remembered one big one, the biggest one. And that is with the Giants. They do trade Carlos Beltran and get Zach Wheeler. Probably, jury's out on that. Was that really a great deal for the Mets? Or is that a better deal for San Francisco? It's probably a tie there. But probably the best deal they ever made with the Giants was, of course, bringing Willie Mays home for Charlie Williams. And, of course, Willie Mays, he was in the winter of his career, but his experience does help the Mets. He did, hit well in the 73 World Series. In fact, people forget this, but the 2 players that the Mets acquired in 72 won the game when Willie was brought back to New York because Rusty hits a grand slam in that game. I believe they played the Giants. Yeah, they do. They play the Giants. And Willie Mays hits the game-winning home run in his farewell to the Giants and his welcome home to New York and his debut with the New York Mets. That being said, I'd love to show you this. Last couple minutes. The greatest deal of all time is by a guy named Harry Cheedy, who was acquired by the Mets way back when. Actually, it was the first official deal that the Mets made with the Cleveland Indians. The problem is Harry Cheedy was traded to the Mets for a player to be named later. Years later, the player to be named later in that deal was Harry Cheedy. Now, I'm making fun of Harry because I am not making fun of Harry in terms of I just think it's one of the funniest things. And what I remember the most about Harry Cheedy is from a baseball book that I read as a kid. And it's called The Great American Baseball Card, Flipping, Trading, and Bubblegum Card. Harry Cheedy actually had a pretty good career. And in future broadcasts, I think this is the best one ever because he was a player traded many times. He had 11-year career, Harry Cheedy. Hey, this is Will O'Toole with the talk of the trade of the Mets and Cleveland. Thanking you again for joining me. Have a good week. Bye now.